Hello viewers and welcome to the final video, the final pre-election video for Elections by Numbers. Today I wanted to show you all of my final maps showing the country as a whole. We're going to go over them in sections. First, we're going to look at the U.S. House seats, followed by the Senate, followed by the governorship, and then finally the presidential results. So let's waste no time, let's hop right to it. Let's first pull up this map here showing my final count for the U.S. House. I was able to illustrate this courtesy of 270 to Win, a great website if you want to make custom maps on your own. And the way I have it organized here is by holds or flip, and organized by party as well. So the dark blues are the Dem holds, dark reds are the GOP holds, and then the lighter colors are flips, showing which party is gaining from that flip. And if you'll look at the spectrum at the top there right off the bat, you'll see that there's 12 gains for Democrats that I've projected and 7 for Republicans. At the end of the day, resulting in a 239 count for Democrats and 196 for Republicans. Currently, there are 232 Democrats in the House and 197 Republicans in the House with a few vacancies. So basically what this is showing us is that Democrats are flipping more seats than Republicans are, but Republicans are doing better in those filling those empty seats. A few districts I would definitely keep my eye on this cycle are, well, let's start on the East Coast and work our way left. Let's start with Maine's 2nd District. Jared Golden, a Democrat, we projected to not retain his seat in Maine this year after winning for the first time 2 years ago. But honestly, that could go either way. That was kind of a tough call to make up there in Maine, so definitely keep an eye on that. Also, going down to Virginia, in that 7th District, Abigail Spanberger, we projected to not retain her seat either. And it's not really noted here, but Virginia's 5th has opened up as well. Those are both in sort of southern central areas of Virginia. I would definitely keep my eyes on those tomorrow. North Carolina is going to be super interesting. We're going to have two pretty clear flips because of redistricting in the state. North Carolina's 2nd and 6th have Republican incumbents, both whom are not running for re-election this year because the demographics of their constituents has changed so dramatically with the new maps. In South Carolina, we have Joe Cunningham, freshman Democrat, on that coastal district losing. Although South Carolina has seen a lot of good polls favoring Democrats recently in the state, Cunningham, I'm less convinced that he will lose than when I first made my South Carolina video months ago, because a lot has changed since then. One of the bolder calls I've made on here is in Illinois. I have Illinois' 13th district flipping to Democrat, a more rural part of the state. Would not be surprised to see that actually being held on to by Republicans going into tomorrow. In Minnesota, I do have that 1st district in the southern part of the state going back to Democrats as well. One of the easiest flips I got to call in this cycle was in Texas, in Will Hurd's district, that 23rd district, which is that massive light blue blob in southwestern Texas along the Rio Grande Valley. Will Hurd is retiring. That's a very heavily Hispanic Latino communities living in that district, and is widely expected to flip in favor of Democrats. On the flip side, Xochitl Torres Small, a Democrat in New Mexico's 2nd district, covering the southern part of the state, has been running neck and neck with her opponent Yvette Harrell. Turnout numbers in the primaries for Yvette, Republicans and Democrats in New Mexico's 2nd greatly favored Republicans. That's why, in a toss-up situation like New Mexico's 2nd, I did end up giving it to the Republican as a flip because those primary numbers were very impressive. In Utah, the district around Salt Lake City, I have flipping back to Republican because it's so... the Cook Political Reports Partisan Voting Index has it pretty right-leaning, but to be perfectly honest, it's a little outdated, those numbers. I would not be surprised to see Ben McAdams go to a 2nd term in Utah's 4th district either, so we'll have to wait and see about that. Oh, I did forget about Oklahoma. I do have that district covering Oklahoma City remaining Democrat. That will be one of the tightest races in the country, I believe. It is an urban area, but it is Oklahoma. It's a freshman Democrat representing the area, and that I had to make a call at the end of the day. I made the call that the Democrat would hang on, but we'll see about that. And then not much changing in the West. We have one district flipping in Arizona, as well as one in California. Actually, that district, that 25th district in California, covering a lot of Ventura County, did flip back to Republican in a special election recently. I am expecting it to go back to Democratic representation during a regular election season. And we do have Democrats widely expected to hang on to the House. Maybe more flips than I projected here. House seats are really hard to call. I mean, you really got to know a lot about the area. There's limited data coming out about incumbents for the 435 districts that exist across this country. But I am expecting Democrats to do very well, actually, to gain a few seats beyond where their majority sits today. And moving right along, let's go straight into the Senate map that I have cooked up for you here in this series. So right now we're looking at all the states that have elections this year. All the white states, all the grayed out states have no Senate election this year. And you'll see that circle in Georgia. That's because Georgia is, of course, having a special election this year after the retirement of Republican Johnny Isakson and the subsequent filling of his seat by Kelly Loeffler. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to fill in a few states at a time, starting with the safest states and then working backwards to the more competitive states. So to begin with, we're going to be coloring in all the safe Republican states at the Senate level seen here. And I don't think there should be anything too surprising here. I mean, starting on the eastern part of the country, West Virginia widely expected to remain Republican. Actually, in Arkansas, there's not even a Democrat running in the Senate race. It's Tom Cotton, the Republican, running against a Libertarian candidate. All these dark red states widely expected to remain Republican. Even Ben Sasse in Nebraska, who recently sort of started to distance himself slightly from Donald Trump, from the president, I still expect to do very well in the state of Nebraska because it is a very Republican state. Next, I'm going to color in the safe Democratic Senate seats. There are fewer of them, but again, nothing too surprising here. Maybe possibly Virginia, because Virginia was until recently a pretty centrist, even a more Republican state. But incumbent Mark Warner, I'm widely expecting to go on to re-election this year, as Virginia has taken pretty dramatic turns to the left recently. And then you have Ed Markey in Massachusetts, Cory Booker in New Jersey, well-known figures in the state, hanging on to their seats for another term. And after all the safe seats are in, we do have Democrats up by 3, 42 to 39 currently, but still 19 more seats to go in more competitive areas. So let's start to color those in next. Let's do the likely Republican states here. These are states that I expect to remain Republican, or in the case of Alabama, actually flip Republican, because Doug Jones is in a very vulnerable position in that very red state right now. A recent addition to this category for me was Mississippi. I'm looking closer at Mike Espy, and he's, polling closer to 50% than I would have expected. I still widely expect Cindy Hyde-Smith to hang on to another term in Mississippi. Same with Mitch McConnell in Kentucky and John Cornyn in Texas. Even as we've seen leftward turns in Texas in more urban areas, he has been consistently polling more favorably than Trump in the state of Texas. I do expect all of these seats to go Republican. Next, we have the likely Democratic seats. I've adding another 5 to the Democrats column starting in New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen widely expected to go into another term, especially because she's in a 3-way race against a Republican and a Libertarian, and those two parties are more likely to cross votes. Gary Peters in Michigan has the advantage of being in Michigan in 2020, which is a year that I do expect the state to vote further left, pretty dramatically further left than it did 4 years ago. I'm sure most of you will remember that it went for Trump 4 years ago. He's running against John James, who also ran in 2018, also lost in 2018. Kind of similar story in Minnesota. Tina Smith, I'm expecting to hang on, going on to a full term in Minnesota. Colorado is actually a flip here, a very likely flip. Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent, I'm expecting to lose to John Hickenlooper, especially to John Hickenlooper, because he is a very well-known 2-term governor in the state, the Democratic governor who oversaw pretty good economic turns in Colorado. Definitely the most favorable flip for Democrats. And then below that, New Mexico, I have that as likely and not safe, only because it is an open seat. Had Tom Udall run for another term, I would definitely have had this safe, but with no incumbency factor working for the Democrat, in this case Ben Ray Lujan against Republican Mark Ronchetti, I am going to categorize that as likely. And after all the likelies are in, we still have Democrats up a little bit, 47 to 43 here. Only 3 more necessary for Democrats to get to the 50-point marker. Republicans, we need another 7, so let's start to work on the lean states, starting with Republicans. And here they're gaining 5 in my eyes. Jamie Harrison, the Democrat challenger to Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, have been polling very well. Of course, South Carolina is a state that I don't think is going to lurch so dramatically to the left as other states have recently. I think Lindsey Graham is still the favorite there, but Jamie Harrison has been a fantastic candidate in the state of South Carolina. Why I have that much closer than other states in the South. With Georgia being an exception here, I do think Dave Perdue may narrowly hang on against Democratic challenger John Ossoff, although both have been polling very well from different firms. Two of the big surprises here are in Kansas and Alaska, I think. I mean, Barbara Bollier in Kansas polling very well against Roger Marshall. Again, no incumbency factor there because the incumbent Republican senator is retiring, Pat Roberts. Alaska is super strange to me, too. I think Al Gross, the challenger to Republican Senator Dan Sullivan, is benefiting from not being a registered Democrat because Alaska really does not elect Democrats. They do elect independent candidates, and he's running on that. Plus, Dan Sullivan's not really as well known in the state as Alaska's other senator, Lisa Murkowski. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Alaska surprising a lot of people in how close it comes this year. Montana's a state that got a lot of attention a few months ago, but people have started, I haven't heard much about Montana recently, but Steve Bullock is a very popular incumbent outgoing governor in the state, Democrat, challenging incumbent Senator Steve Daines. Bullock has been polling lower than Daines recently, but there has been extremely high early turnout in Montana relative to its neighbors, especially. You look next door to Idaho, the Dakotas, Wyoming. Montana is just smoking them in terms of early turnout, and it's coming from a lot of more, not urban, but less rural parts of Montana, college towns. Higher population areas that tend to skew more Democrats. So I'll be very curious to see how Montana turns out. It's definitely not safe for either party. I am giving it slightly to the Republicans here. And Republicans are now up to 48, not enough for a majority in the Senate. So now let's add the last category, the lean Democrat states seen here. And this does end up giving the majority to Democrats here. We already talked about Colorado flipping for Democrats, but now add to that 5 more races, including Arizona, Iowa, Georgia's special election, North Carolina, and Maine. Susan Collins' approval rating in Maine has just plummeted. She went from being one of the most popular senators to one of the least popular over the course of this year. Tom Tillis in North Carolina, not that popular either. He's facing a flawed candidate now. Cal Cunningham's got a little, that extramarital situation came up, but hardly affected polling numbers at all. And I'm still giving that slightly to Democrats here. Raphael Warnock has been doing very well in polling recently. Of course, that is a four-way race, widely expected to go to a runoff, so a lot will depend on what happens tomorrow, if indeed that race does end up going to a runoff, to see who will carry that. But Warnock has been sort of breaking away on his own while the two Republican candidates have been sort of trying to out-Trump each other in a state that is increasingly becoming less Republican. So it's an interesting approach. Iowa's a tricky one. There was that really bad poll that came out just like a couple days ago for Democratic challenger Teresa Greenfield from a very reliable pollster in Iowa. And this is one of the tightest races I think that we'll see at the Senate level, purely a toss-up. I did end up giving it slightly to Greenfield here because Iowa is so elastic. It's a very, very bouncy state. They did elect incumbent Republican Joni Ernst in a midterm year, 2014, which was a very good year for Republicans. I don't expect her to do quite as well in a presidential year, especially a very high turnout presidential year, as this is increasingly likely to be. And in Arizona, we have another flawed candidate, Martha McSally, appointed by the governor, running against a very disciplined, very good candidate, popular Mark Kelly, former astronaut, Democratic candidate in Arizona. And this is what my map ended up looking like after this whole series is through. I do have Democrats taking the majority back from Republicans after 10 years. Mitch McConnell moves to the minority party. Chuck Schumer moves to the majority. I do have one more map to show you here. Actually, this is colored by the party makeup of the two Senate seats in each state. So blue states have two Democratic senators, red states have two Republican senators, and after my recent projections, the purple states are the states that have one Republican and one Democratic senator. The quantity of these colors didn't really change much, but they did move around a little. North Carolina and Georgia, as well as Iowa, both turning purple, and Arizona, Colorado, and Maine going blue after having previously been purple. Okay, let's toss that one aside. Let's move right along to the governor elections. I'm going to take the same approach here. First, just showing you what is up this year in terms of who's running. All the white states have gubernatorial elections this year. All the grayed out states do not. And we're going to start again first with the safe Republican states colored in here. So in Indiana, North Dakota, and Utah, you have Republican gubernatorial candidates running in very Republican states against Democratic challengers that have basically had no momentum behind them and widely expected to actually remain Republican in all three of these cases. No flips here. The only two safe Democratic states, I believe, are going to be Delaware and Washington. Again, same story. Very Democratic states, no momentum from the from the Republican candidates in either of them. And now the likely Republican states, we have those two New England states, which have gubernatorial elections every 2 years rather than every 4. Very peculiar in that they typically vote for Republicans, actually, in fact, having two of the most popular governors in the entire country, especially strange in Vermont, a state that otherwise votes heavily Democrat for senators, for their representative, but skewing to the right for Republicans clearly, as Phil Scott is very likely to go into another term in Vermont, as well as Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, as well as Mike Parsons in Missouri. Up next, the likely, well, there's only one likely Democratic seat here. I do have it in North Carolina. I am expecting Roy Cooper, a pretty popular incumbent Democratic governor, to go into another term in that state. Up next, we're going to look at the lean seats. Actually, I have no lean Republican seats at the gubernatorial level, so we'll skip right over to lean Democratic seats. And one of the most, maybe the most controversial calls I'm making in this series, in that I think possibly the West Virginia governorship will flip Democrat. If you've seen my West Virginia video, which I released months ago, you may already know that West Virginia has not elected not elected a Republican governor in decades. Its current governor, Jim Justice, ran as a Democrat 4 years ago, but switched to the Republican Party is running again this year as a Republican. But the way my model works, it depends, a lot of my calculations depend on how the state has voted for particular parties over the years. And because they have not elected Republicans in so long, I do have this narrowly going to Democrats. I've not seen anyone else make this call besides myself. I want to be the only one to get it right if it does in fact go this way, though. So I'm leaving this blue, albeit very light blue. And then we do have, I also have Montana going narrowly back to, or remaining Democrat after Steve Bullock is finishing his term up and running for the Senate. So at the end of the day, you have an even makeup in this country in governorships, 25 to 25, and the only flip here actually being in a Democrat's favor in the state of West Virginia. Maybe a terrible call, but I don't know. I like to pick upsets here and there, so that's the one I'm sticking with. Let's move right along to, before we move on, I want to show you this final makeup of every state's governorship. Some really odd colors here. If you know anything else about these states' politics, particularly in Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Kentucky, Massachusetts, and Vermont. I mean, they elect governors very much the opposite of how they elect their senators and representatives overall. And what's really curious about the Republican governors in otherwise blue states like Larry Hogan in Maryland, Phil Scott in Vermont, and Charlie Baker in Massachusetts is that they're very popular governors. Not Trump Republicans, more traditional Republicans, very popular in their state, though, with their more Democratic constituents. So it's interesting to see how states elect governors relative to everything else. And here you go. This is how I've projected it will end up with that blue West Virginia, man. I don't know. Well, I can't wait to find out. Again, I may be totally off, but I want to be the only one that gets it right if I'm not off. And now let's move right along to the moment that most, if not all of you have been waiting for, I'm sure, the presidential map. Obviously, every state gets a vote here, so every state is white currently, and we're going to do this the same way we've done already, starting with safe states, and specifically safe Republican states filled in here. Shouldn't be any major surprises here, maybe possibly Indiana and Missouri being dark red. Some predictors have them lighter shades of red. They were closer to the center in a few election cycles ago, but I don't think either of them is really seriously in play at any sort of level this year like others do. Some people have even had a lighter red Mississippi. I definitely don't see that happening yet. It's not a very high turnout state. Definitely also reflected in its early turnout numbers, which have been embarrassingly low compared to other states around the country. All these states definitely going to go to Trump this year. I did leave that, you see that circle in Nebraska. That's, of course, because as many of you know, Nebraska awards its electoral votes by district. There are 3 of them in Nebraska. And so that white circle is representing Omaha, Nebraska's 2nd district, the most urban district, and not certain to go Republican at any sort of level. Now let's color in the safe blue states here. No real surprises again. No surprises at all. No, and this does include actually Washington, D.C., which you can't see because it's so small, but also safe Democrat. Don't forget Hawaii there on the bottom, very safe Democrat. Some of the highest early turnout rates in the country right now. Next, we have likely Republican states. There are 5 of them here. South Carolina on the east was a tough one to call. I think South Carolina may be benefiting a little bit this year from the coattail effect, whether it's coming from Trump or Biden or from Jamie Harrison possibly, maybe dragging a few voters to the left further than they were a few years ago. That's why I have a slightly lighter shade of red here. Same kind of story with Kansas. Pretty competitive Senate race there, as well as in Montana. I have Utah's lighter red, not because it's a pro-Biden state, but because it's not. They do not like Trump in Utah. There's Mormons. There's a lot of Mormons that live in Utah. They're not going to necessarily vote for Biden, but they're either going to not vote or vote for a third-party candidate. The only reason why I have that not as a safe red state, because it is very Republican, but not Trump Republican. Alaska is an interesting one. Alaska is a really hard state to poll. It's got I think, kind of under the radar competitive Senate race going on. Alaska is also very strange in how it votes, how its communities vote. The more urban areas actually tend to skew more Republican, and the rural areas more Democrat, which is the opposite of like every other state in this country. It's a very odd place politically, and why I don't have it as dark red. Up next, we have likely Democrat states, and as you'll see here, we've already projected a winner from likely states. We haven't even gotten into lean states yet. That's because we've covered now with likely Democrat states Virginia, Nevada, Colorado, all formerly swing states, now pretty likely Democrat, along with New Mexico, Minnesota, a state that Trump got close to flipping. He lost by 1.5% in Minnesota 4 years ago, but definitely I do not expect it to be that close again, and actually, in fact, moving further to the left, along with those three Rust Belt states, the three big surprises of 2016, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all being pretty likely blue because of how they voted in 2018. The states really did turn out in high numbers for Democrats 2 years ago in all those three states. Same story with New Hampshire, a state that went for George Bush 20 years ago. But this year I do not expect to be kind to Trump at all, really. Maine, I do have Maine's first district as very likely, and the overall here, Maine at large being likely for Biden as well. I would not be surprised to see Maine lurch a little further to the right of New Hampshire in later elections, but I've already covered that in my state videos. Up next, let's do some more lean states, starting with Republicans. Not much to add here. Oh, I do have Ohio narrowly going to Trump again this year. It did go very dramatically to the right 4 years ago from previous elections, and then didn't really see much of a blue wave there 2 years ago, despite having a governor election which went Republican and a senatorial election which remained Democrat, actually. Sherrod Brown going to another term in Ohio, but I would not be surprised to see this state remain in Trump's column despite the heavy Democratic influence to Ohio's north and east. And it may be hard to notice, but I've also colored in that district in Nebraska and the one in Maine as well as light red. Those are really hard to make predictions for. I mean, I've seen a lot of people calling Nebraska's second as lean Democrat, which I could very easily see. To be perfectly honest, it's a very urban area, suburban area. Demographics that have been veering away from Trump recently. But at the end of the day, I did have to make a call, and I'm going to leave both Maine's second and Nebraska's second in Trump's column, but just very narrowly. And then finishing this off, we do have our lean Democrat states, and yes, that is a blue Texas. You can see down there. Early turnout in Texas has been absolutely off the charts. I believe they hit like 108% of their total 2016 turnout before early voting finished, before election day has even gotten here. And it's a lot of counties, a lot of urban counties around Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and El Paso. There's no party affiliation data available from Texas. People have been speculating, but there's no hard data from there. You can only look at the types of areas that are turning out in high numbers, and it is very urban areas. Similar story with North Carolina, actually, Wake County, Durham County, Orange County, Mecklenburg County. Those are areas covering Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Charlotte, Buncombe County to a lesser degree, and the mountains covering Asheville, a very liberal place in the mountains of North Carolina. Georgia, counties surrounding Atlanta and its suburbs, very high turnout. Georgia's, I believe, crossed 90%. I don't have the numbers in front of me of how much turnout there is relative to 2016, but it is very high in Georgia and Florida and North Carolina, as well as Iowa and Arizona too. I mean, all very high turnout states. There's not party affiliation data available for all of them, but actually for most of these light blue states, there is. The only exception is actually Georgia. I'm actually going to put a few links in the description of this video. Very useful links to check out if you want to learn more about early voting or what to expect on election night, which I'm going to talk about in a minute here. But this is my final presidential map. I'm going to say 393 for Biden, 145 for Trump, with one of the biggest surprises of the night possibly being in Texas. I just have a hard time looking at those early vote turnout numbers in Texas and not believing that it will narrowly go to Biden this year. Narrowly. So let's toss that aside. Lastly, I'm going to talk to you a bit about what to expect on election night, what states to look at, what states to not expect data from on election night. And again, there's going to be a link in the description from 538, Nate Silver's website. Very good website to learn more about this stuff. A few states to keep your eye on. First of all, Florida. Definitely keep an eye on Florida tomorrow night, specifically at Duval County, at Sumter County. Sumter County is has one of the oldest mean populations in terms of age in the entire country. It covers the villages. I am expecting it to go to Trump, definitely expecting it to go to Trump. The question, though, is how much it goes to Trump, and that will dictate probably how the rest of the state will skew that night. If Trump does not win at least 65% of the vote in Sumter County, he will not win Florida, and therefore will not win the election. He cannot win without Florida. There's just no way. Definitely keep an eye on Sumter County. He needs at least 65% in that county. Also, Duval County, which covers Jacksonville, has been, one of the more right-leaning major urban areas in Florida, although it did vote more Democrat in 2018 during the midterms. Of course, Bill Nelson, the Democrat, lost the Senate race in Florida 2 years ago, and the governorship remained a Republican, but Duval did lurch to the left. And if that happens again this year, that's big trouble for Trump as well. Definitely keep an eye on that county. Miami-Dade has also not been turning out as highly as Democrats maybe were hoping in Florida. So if turnout is kind of stagnant in Miami-Dade, that could be trouble for Biden in the state. But Trump needs to win Florida much more than Biden does. Biden has paths forward without Florida. Trump does not. Keep an eye on Florida. Also keep an eye on North Carolina. So both of these states that I've mentioned so far, Florida and North Carolina, start counting their votes early. We should be able to expect results on election night. And North Carolina is a particularly useful gauge to see how the night could go because there is a very tight Senate race there. If Cal Cunningham ends up flipping that seat to Democrats, it seems very likely to me that the Senate will flip for Democrats as a whole because that's the tightest. That's one of the most competitive races that Democrats are more likely than not to pick up this year. If he wins that state, I would expect Maine, Colorado, and Arizona to all flip blue as well, thereby giving Democrats at least 50 seats. So definitely keep an eye on that Senate race in North Carolina. And again, Trump has to win North Carolina. He cannot win without North Carolina. Biden doesn't need it. I am expecting Biden to narrowly carry it, and its 15 Electoral College votes would be a pleasure to have in his corner for sure, but again, not totally necessary. He's more likely to do better in those Rust Belt states up in the Great Lakes area. So we have so far Florida, North Carolina. Texas is a state that counts votes really fast. I don't know that they're actually allowed to start counting before polls close or even before election day, but it's a very fast counting state. Very efficient. These states that I've mentioned so far have very good infrastructure for counting votes on election night. And again, if Trump absolutely has no path without Texas, again, similar story to North Carolina and Florida, but even to a more extreme degree. I mean, there's 38 formerly safe Republican Electoral College votes in Texas that are now up in the air. So keep an eye on Texas for sure. I wouldn't expect to see election results from Arizona on election night because I don't know if you remember from 2018, but it took like a week to get that Senate race sorted out. So don't worry too much about Arizona's results, especially if we have more definitive results coming in from Florida and North Carolina and Texas before we even get to that state. Also, I would not expect to hear from the Rust Belt states on election night at all. I would not stay up all night waiting for results from Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin because they're not allowed to count their early votes before the polls close or before election day. And I would only really worry about the results in those states if all of the states I've already mentioned all went for Trump. North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona. If all those states ended up going for Trump, then I would wait to see results from those Great Lakes states. But barring a pretty extreme result like that, I wouldn't sweat it too much. Definitely keep an eye on North Carolina, Florida, and Texas on election night. I would expect to hear from those states. And that just about does it for my last video. Thank you guys for watching this. I hope you enjoyed my maps. Thank you for watching, thank you for voting, and I'll see you next time.